isn't a religion. No one is bound by it. It is open to question. And that's the principal reason why Hindu tradition is the most accepting, inclusive, and inherently plural. In fact, India would have been secular despite the British. Which is why, luckily, there are still some who don't prostrate before Western secularism. And that's what Tamil Nadu Governor Mr. Ravi was saying when he ventured to tell us that Western secularism is an import, an ill-suited import, and that our country must be guided by dharma. Because as we encountered secularism, many frauds were committed in its name in our country. This is what N. Ravi, Tamil Nadu Governor, said, and let me quote him word for word. Many frauds have been committed against the people of this country, and one of them is the wrong interpretation of secularism. Secularism is a European concept and should remain there. In India, there is no need for secularism. In Europe, secularism came because there was a fight between the church and the king. The entire Constituent Assembly said, Bharat is born out of dharma. How can there be conflict in dharma? 25 years later, during the emergency period, an insecure Prime Minister, in an effort to appease certain sections of the people, introduced secularism into the Constitution, unquote. Now, viewers, unfortunately, the Congress has reflexively attacked Governor Ravi and accused him of plotting with the Modi government to rewrite the Constitution and turn India into a Hindu religious Rajya, where minorities will be discriminated against, subordinated to the majority. Manikam Tagore, Congress Member of Parliament, says, quote, these are condemnable views. BJP wants to insult other religions. BJP and RSS want to change the Constitution, and we will never allow it, unquote. Dinesh Gundu Rao, Karnataka Minister, says, quote, Tamil Nadu Governor wants to propagate hate. India's ethos says secularism. The West propagates one religion, one language concept, unquote. Viewers, but modern day Congress leaders need to ask themselves why the framers of the Constitution didn't think it necessary to include the word secularism in the original preamble of the Constitution. And did the lack of the express mention of the word secularism in the preamble make India any less secular right up to 1976? Was India always going to be secular because Sanatana Dharma, the edifice of our civilization ethos, is inherently inclusive and plural? That's what makes Hindus tolerant. The answer, in fact, has been supplied by Congress greats themselves when they were debating in 1949 a proposal moved by Constituent Assembly member K.T. Shah to inject the word secular into the Constitution's preamble. And after hearing them, perhaps you will accept that Governor Ravi isn't off the mark, isn't wrong. Here's what B.R. Ambedkar, the person who helmed the drafting committee of the Constitution, said. He said, what should be the policy of this state? How the society should be organized in social and economic sides are matters that cannot be laid down in the Constitution itself because that is destroying democracy altogether, unquote. He was against the idea of introducing the word socialism and secularism. Both of these were debated in the Constituent Assembly. Here's another hard fact. Jawaharlal Nehru, who was the Prime Minister at that time of the interim assembly, and he said, quote, another word is thrown up a good deal, this secular state business. Maybe with all humility, those gentlemen who use this word often consult some dictionary before they use it, unquote. Now, viewers, Nehru perhaps didn't want this word injected because then he would have been held to it in some regards. His government swore by secularism but didn't follow it to the last letter. Viewers, allowances were made. While the personal laws of one particular faith were encoded, others weren't. And there were several other discriminations wrought under the name secularism by Mr. Nehru. So he had his reasons not to introduce the word secular in the preamble. Then there was Sardar Patel, and he said, quote, in the long run, it would be in the interest of all to forget that there is anything like majority or minority in this country, and that in India there is only one community, unquote, which is, viewers, Indians. Hard fact 4, K.M. Munshi was a senior Congress member, also part of Nehru's cabinet. He said, quote, we are a people with deeply religious moorings. At the same time, we have a living tradition of religious tolerance. The result of the broad outlook of Hinduism that all religions lead to the same God. We had to evolve a characteristically Indian secularism, and the Indian state could not possibly have a state religion, nor could a rigid line be drawn between the state and church as in the United States, unquote. Mr. Munshi, it could be said, is almost echoing Mr. Ravi, except that, of course, he came 76 years before Mr. Ravi and made the same point. Now let's open this up, viewers. This is just going to be a two-way debate because this is an interesting and a very, very complex matter. We have with us Dr. Ranganathan, who's written on this issue. In my book too, viewers, Modi in India, I have written on this issue. And we have Sanjay Hegde, senior advocate of the Supreme Court. Now, let me begin with you.
Written on the issue.
So, yes, you have also, of course, written on the issue, and you fought cases apparently on this issue too. So, sorry about not including you amongst the writers on this panel. But Sanjay Hegde, let me just ask you, and let's, break this down for our viewers. Was India secular right up till 1976? And if you don't think it was to the letter, then after 1976, has it become secular when Indira Gandhi inserted the word into the preamble? And therefore, when we didn't have this express sort of pledge to uphold secularism in the preamble, were we less secular?
Well, way before 1976, go to 1973, the Keshavananda judgment. The Keshavananda judgment said that secularism was part of the basic structure of the constitution. Dr. Ambedkar, whom you quoted in that exchange with K.T. Shah, Dr. Ambedkar said there was no necessity to specifically state that the state was secular or socialist. He said, look at the constitution, look at the constitution's provisions, they are always secular. And his reply to Dr. K.T. Shah was more to the word socialism, where he said that, look, we have very many provisions in the constitution which speak of a socialistic pattern of society, but we cannot bind future governments. India made a very conscious constitutional choice to be secular. India made a constitutional choice to be secular primarily because our Constituent Assembly had seen great violence in the previous decade. You had the World War, you had the Jewish Holocaust, you had partition violence, you had the murder of the Mahatma before your constitution came in. And therefore, there was a conscious choice, specifically after partition, that no, we are not creating a Hindu Pakistan. We are creating an India where everybody is equal, whether you believe in something or you don't believe in something. India is alike for the believer as well as the unbeliever. Though atheists, agnostics, people who believe in Pastafarianism, everybody is an Indian irrespective of your religion. So now, are you a secular country? And are you now going to change to saying that there will be only one religion which will be a state religion and the rest are there on sufferance? So that constitutional change has not yet come about, and I hope it never comes about, because we are a greatly complex and diverse country. As the great poet, who was it? Firak Gorakhpuri, who said, सरज़मीने हिंद पर अक़वामे आलम के फिराक काफिले बसते गए हिंदुस्तान बनता गया. By the by, Firak Gorakhpuri was Raghupati Sahai Firak. So we are a composite of many cultures, many languages, and secularism is a conscious choice made by an 80% Orthodox Hindu majority in the Constituent Assembly. I think we are a secular country and we will continue to be.
But you haven't answered the question, Mr. Hegre. I asked you that the word was inserted in 1976. Were we not secular?
Putting the word in did not make a difference.
Did not make a difference.
It only reminded us in our preamble what the Supreme Court had already held in Keshavananda. 13 judges of
and
the
secondly,
Supreme Court.
Have we been secular?
We have attempted to be secular attempted to be, but at all times there have been times when we have failed.
So Gujarat now we have to ask ourselves, why did we fail?
2002.
Why did please let's not be selective. Let's look at the several other hundreds of riots. Let's look at
6th of December 1992.
Wow.
Were we a secular country?
What were we in 1990 when Kashmiri Hindus like me were thrown out of the state of Kashmir?
I thought you were a Kannadiga.
I'm both. Tell me. I'm an Indian first though, but tell me.
Yes. So I'll tell you, it was wrong and it continues to be wrong.
Yeah.
But the answer is not to throw others out of the country in revenge.
Okay. But we can't cherry pick our examples. In fact, viewers, the policies that were made by Mr. Nehru, the great liberal secularist, were hardly upholding the letter and the spirit of secularism that was woven into our constitution, viewers. And Sanjay Hegre used the term, we didn't want to be a Hindu Pakistan. He could easily have said that we could also not have chosen to be a Christian UK, Anglican UK, but he didn't, viewers. He didn't. Anglican UK is still very secular. So you have to ask yourself why. Is it that in a large number of Middle Eastern countries, Muslim countries, secularism hasn't taken root? And neither has democracy for that matter, viewers. You have to ask yourself. And then you have to ask yourself why Mr. Nehru was busy appeasing one community over the others. Anyhow, Dr. Ranganathan, what do you make of the statements made by Mr. Ravi and of course Mr. Hegre?
Good evening, Rahul, and good evening to Mr. Hegde. We've had wonderful discussions for more than years, and it's very enchanting, this one. But may I begin by saying that Governor Ravi is right and wrong at the same time, and I hope Mr. Hegde would mind my telling that he is completely wrong. Let me explain. There are two issues here, and I think both merit going into. What is secularism, and are we secular? Look, Rahul, a system, a discovery, a characteristic may have its etymology or origin in the European or Western thought or philosophy. But that characteristic, that discovery, that system can and does exist in the East or anywhere around the world. That the B form of DNA is double helical is not just a Western concept, it's a global concept. The genomic DNA of Indians is also double helical. Darwin's theory of evolution is not a Western concept. It describes and explains evolution everywhere. There is nothing called European double helical DNA or Indian double helical DNA. There is only double helical DNA. Similarly, the concept of secularism may have originated in the West. It may be understood as secularism being total separation of religion and state or church and state, total. But the meaning of this concept cannot be changed to suit a particular nation or ideology. You are either secular or you are not secular. And our state is plural. Our state is not secular. There are half a dozen articles and amendments and directive principles in our constitution that make it plural, not secular. In fact, as you rightly said, the word secular was inserted in our preamble by Indira Gandhi during the emergency. It was absent from Ambedkar's constitution. But why do we feel plural is bad? Do we have a complex against nations that are secular? And why must we feel it is bad to be plural? Why must we insist that plural means secular? It does not. Our state declares itself to be secular, but is shamelessly not so. You can have the state and the government give Hajj subsidies for decades, use taxpayers' money to host grand iftar parties, plunder state coffers to pay monthly salaries to thousands of Maulvis, ask government run UGC to completely fund minority institutions that keep 50% seats reserved for Christians, step in to overturn a Supreme Court judgment just to appease Muslims, leech thousands of crores preferentially exclusively from Hindu temples, sell off and control thousands of acres of Hindu temple land, spend hundreds of crores of taxpayer money for the Kartarpur corridor, run madrasas and still be secular. Secularism for us is when, quote, there is no deity except Allah and no one has the right to be worshipped but him, unquote, amplified through the loudspeaker 5 times a day is creating enmity. But peacefully chanting Hanuman Chalisa while not denigrating anyone else's religion is creating enmity. Secularism is when reciting polytheists are the worst of creatures near a temple is not provocative, but reciting Bhajman Ramcharan Sukhdai one day in a year near a mosque is. Secularism is controlling and taxing only temples but not mosques. It is fighting for Muslims to wear hijab to school, but beating Hindus for wearing Kalawa Bindi and Tirak to school. Secularism is respecting the Supreme Court Sabrimala judgment, but overturning the Supreme Court Shah Bano judgment. For how long, Rahul, will we pretend that we are not practicing secularism, but rather appeasement or pluralism? Rahul, if you truly believe that religion should keep out of state, the corollary is equally applicable. This is logic. It's embarrassing to state it again and again. The state should also keep out of religion. Does it? No. Why is the state paying the surveyors of the Waqf board? Why is the state paying salaries to Maulvis? Why is the state giving interest-free loans to set up shops on Waqf land and mosque land? Why is the state running madrasas? Why is the state giving hundreds of crores to set up Christian Development Corporation? How can a state be secular and at the same time control more than 100,000 Hindu temples? Rahul, should we be secular? Yes. But are we? No.
And therefore, viewers, Mr. Ravi said, many frauds have been committed against the people of this country, and one of them is the wrong interpretation of secularism. So, Mr. Hegde, we have these examples, these aberrations. So, that's why I'm asking you, what is the bruha, what is the Congress getting into a lather about? That, oh, secularism, when they haven't done anything to uplift, uphold the real basic tenets of it.
I don't speak for the Congress.
No, I understand that. I'm just generally asking.
So my point is simple. Listen, I don't care who follows what religion, but I do care if a fellow Indian is discriminated against on the basis of his religion.
Okay, so then should we have, Mr. Hegde, a straight question? The UCC cutting across all lines, all castes, all religions, no questions asked.
If you have a neutral UCC, religion neutral, maybe yes. But
maybe.
Let me put it this way. A UCC which allows for gay marriages, a UCC which says that this is how a marriage in any form is to be registered. You may have a Hindu ritual, you may have a Sikh ritual, you have a Muslim ritual, but everything gets registered. All that is fine. There is no problem. But to privilege one over the other, or saying that this is right, this is what we've been following, and therefore.
But that's what has been going on for years in this country, in the name of formulating various laws to carry people along.
You have forgotten your history.
Okay.
When the Hindu Code Bill came in, who were the biggest opponents of it? The biggest opponents of it were the then Jansangh and the RSS of that time.
Yes, naturally. Because it was one-sided. The other community was being completely given a free pass. They had no obligations to conform to any higher law, secular law. That's why.
Listen, in 1939, when we were still not an independent republic, that's when the Shariat Act came in, the British codified that. Then came the question of how do you codify Hindu law. Hindu law had various schools. You had Mitakshara, you had Dayabaga, etc., etc. How do you codify it was the first step.
Okay, very quickly.
You have now two codified religious laws.
Okay.
How do you merge it into a uniform civil code is a third question.
Is a third question, etc., etc. Yes, Doctor.
No, look, Mr. Hegde is right on one count when he says having privilege giving privilege to preferentially one community is wrong. I agree with it.
Exactly.
But then he doesn't explain why discriminating against one community is right. It's not. I just gave you 10-15 examples where Hindus are being rampantly discriminated against in this business of secularism.
Give me the time, we'll answer.
No, come on. I mean, look, these are facts, and
we
it's
are
not
running
for
out of
you.
time.
And it's not for you, Mr. Hegde, to answer this question. It is for actually.
Go on and on and on, because
it is.
You know, I can't regurgitate facts the way Anand does. Yeah, I don't know whether he has a teleprompter or a compendium of WhatsApp in front of him. But each of these things has an answer.
You can be rude.
Okay.
Just to show that there is no teleprompter
now,
here.
For instance,
There
he
is no
spoke of the Hajj.
teleprompter for you to be embarrassed.
Okay,
about Mr.
gentlemen, now,
Hegde.
gentlemen. Yeah.
Let's not be rude.
He spoke
Let's not
about
be
the
rude
Hajj
here.
subsidy. The Hajj
Let's not be
subsidy
rude
was
here.
basically an Air India subsidy.
Why should it be? Why should it be any subsidy?
And it was, a Muslim judge of the Supreme Court who struck it down.
That doesn't matter
Okay,
whether he did or he didn't. The point is, a policy was drafted to favor one community over the others. And viewers, I mean, you have in this country.
It was drafted to favor Air India.
Okay. Now, viewers, we can put a spin on it. We can put this spin on it. This is a great comeback by you, Mr. Hegde. But let's not pretend that the elephant isn't in the room. It is very much in the room, and that is one of the reasons why Mr. Modi won in election, viewers. Because many people were sick and tired of this selectiveness. Now, you can accuse Mr. Modi of not living up to all the expectations of the Hindu community, this, that, the other, but that's a debate for a different day. The point is, viewers, at the kernel of it, Ravi is not wrong.
Yes.
We have committed frauds in the name of secularism, and we have to accept it. Now, we can make allowances, we can come up with all sorts of post facto explanations, but they don't suit the letter of the law, and that's why in the courts, each one of them is getting struck off, one by one. Whether you have a UCC at the end of the day, interventions are being upheld, and of course, the opposition says that the judges are corrupt, etc., etc. There's judicial barbarism. There are some wonky intellectuals who sit and write express edits, who write all these highfalutin, silly words. But that's immaterial, viewers. Let's move on, because there is another important, connected, related issue. In Tamil Nadu, a youth was set upon by 4 assailants who cornered him and cut off his sacred thread or janayu. The police are investigating the outrage committed upon the youth's freedom to practice his faith. But the attack is a growing list of unprovoked attempts to deliberately undermine Hindu traditions, customs. Viewers, this happened in Tirunelveli on September 21. And this has become a major point of contention in the state. Not enough people are speaking about it, viewers, of course, because the administration there right now is not reflexively in any way sympathetic to the Sanatani cause. Be that as it may, viewers, recently in a residential complex, a woman, as you can see in the middle of your screens, stamped upon the Onam Pookulam, claiming it shouldn't have been drawn in a common area. There have been several reports coming from elsewhere of attacks on Ganpati Puja processions. But perhaps the most shocking betrayal of Hindu sensitivities took place in Tirupati, where prasadam was adulterated with beef tallow, pig fat, fish oil, considered anathema to practicing Hindus. The question is, why in the land of their birth are Hindus and their traditions not being taken seriously? Why are they vulnerable? Let's speak to S. Gurumurthy, the editor of the iconic Tughlaq magazine, to get a sense really of these issues. Thank you, first of all, Mr. Gurumurthy, for taking the time out. This is a very important subject, and your contribution is always valued, even by our viewers. Mr. Gurumurthy, first things first, does it surprise you that liberties were taken with the sanctity of the prasadam offered at Tirupati temple?
I'm not. Because the government is a secular institution which doesn't know the grammar of sacredness. And secular institution in the sense in which the Indian secularism has been defined is that they should be extremely careful about minority religion. and they can take liberties with the Hindu religion. This has been a very astonishingly different, what I would call as discrimination against the Hindus, constitutional discrimination. So whether it is Tirupati or even approaching the Brahmins, Janu or cut in Tamil Nadu, this is because you don't hold the Hindu religion as sacred, because Hindu religion doesn't threaten you. It doesn't have a theological enemy. If somebody has a theological enemy, they can mobilize and create huge issues. So the government is afraid of them. They have no fear of the Hindus. Why the Hindus do not organize? Because the Hindus have the responsibility of running the country also. Everyone in this country has only rights. Minority rights, this right, that right. Have you ever called Hindu right? Hindus have the responsibility to ensure that the country runs. And so, it is like a mother. Hinduism as a philosophy also accommodates this. So I am not surprised.
Okay.
It will take a very long time for the Hindus and the state to align.
So would you, Mr. Gurumurthy, put this down simply to the failure of the state to regulate itself with regards to the Hindu faith or religions in their entirety, or is there something more insidious at work here?
See, there are two things. After all, it was a Hindu nation. Hindu nation in the sense it was never against anyone. But it was Hindu nation because people moved from one end of the country to the other for expressing their great devotion for the country. This is what Mahatma Gandhi says. What brings the country together are these Punya Kshetras, these rivers, sacred rivers. So there is a responsibility for the government. It is not one or two or three places. There are hundreds of places to which people go. And so the government has the responsibility to maintain the sanctity and the sacredness of these places. And it requires government support. And that is where I think Hindus are at a disadvantage. Because Hindus do not have an institution like the church or the several churches or this kind of jamaats and things like that. So being not organized, if any religion needs the support of the government, it is Hinduism. And the government must support it for one more reason, as Mahatma Gandhi said, because that forms the basis of national integration. This is not something which the Indian discourse recognizes.
So,
this is the problem.
So the question is, how should we ensure that the sanctity of Hindu places of worship is never defiled, for example?
You see, it can only be by large scale awareness. For example, I have been a Hindu activist for a very long time, from 1970s. It is the Ram Janmabhoomi movement which shifted the ecosystem, which made the Hindus assert themselves. But the whole world pounced on them. The secular, the liberal, the Muslims, the Christians, the vote-hungry politicians. It took 40 years for the Hindu movement to assert itself, because the Hindu movement would not behave like the minority movement, because there will be chaos if the Hindus behave irresponsibly. So they have to launch a movement, at the same time run the country. So it's a long road. My feeling is that the day Hindus are able to tell the politicians that you can't take us for granted, because if you take us for granted, there will be chaos. And if you take us for granted, there will be no one to back you. The power system is today backed by the majority community. You are dividing the majority community to secure that support, which is again cutting at the root of the nation. What unites you the politicians are dividing. It's a this is where I think the Ram Janmabhoomi movement made a huge shift. So my view is that it is not possible for a long time for these parties. These are all ultimately family-based parties which are there to make money and things like that.
True.
They will not be able to sustain for long.
But there is a contradiction. Any attempt to organize is viewed by the left ecosystem as an attempt at revivalism, Hindu revivalism, and dismissed as a threat to India's secular fabric, Mr. Gurumurthy.
See, this is bound to be. This is bound to be there all over the world. For instance, if you take about what's happening in Europe, Europe is almost a lost cause. There, the right wing is struggling to maintain a basic sense of nationhood and their identity. The same thing there also. What's happening in America? You see, the liberals have set off an irresponsible, anarchist way of discourse, debate, and political action. So, it is a global level issue. Only Islam has been able to counter it because liberalism is afraid of Islam, terrified. So, it shakes hands with Islam. And that is proving to be a problem for Europe and America. And Russia is realizing, to some extent China is realizing, even the Middle East is realizing. I had a discussion with Mr. Ali Issa, who was the World Muslim League Secretary General, and he is also in charge of the Mecca and Medina mosques. He told me very plainly, the Muslims are today afraid of extremist ideology. And extremist ideology has become the mainstream ideology. It is not a personal conversation he made. This was in the open Vivekananda Foundation lecture. And he even went to the extent of saying, the only religion which preaches that all religions are true, Hinduism, that is the only solution to the world. Who is talking? The World Muslim League Secretary General. It's all recorded.
Yes.
Because of vote and vote bank considerations, our politicians are selling the country's conscience, bit by bit. But the world is awakening. We have got partners all over. So I don't think the Hindu movement can be pressurized as revivalist or anything in future, because all over the world, the threat is being recognized today. This is my study. I've written about it quite extensively in the Vivekananda International Foundation's document with authenticity and backing.
But Mr. Gurumurthy, many people are now saying, and perhaps this is out of a sense of sort of knee-jerkism or what have you, that there's time for a nationwide blasphemy law. What are your views?
You see, this blasphemy is actually a product of Abrahamism. This blasphemy law is being used only to defame the Hindus. But blasphemy is in Hindu literature, you will find people questioning the existence of God, or the debates that have been going on for thousands of years. They always say that there is a scope for disbelievers, non-believers. But what is happening? This blasphemy law from the perspective of Islam and Christianity is dangerous for debate. So you cannot have a debate about Islam and Christianity, their faith. In fact, there was one great theologian, Hans Kung, who formulated the 1965 Vatican Council, Second Vatican Council. He wrote that there must be three principles on which there has to be a global debate, otherwise there will be war. He said, there must be dialogue between religions. 2, if there is no dialogue between religions, there will be war. But if there has to be a dialogue between religions, all religious beliefs have to be openly discussed. Hinduism can do it. Islam and Christianity cannot do it. Because if their faith is unraveled, the religion collapses. He was sacked. He was the greatest theologian of the Catholic Church till 1990s. They cannot. There is a big problem. There is a catch. So I think all this, there are different forces working. My own view is that this blasphemy law is to protect the Islamic and Christian faiths, the Abrahamic faiths, from coming into public debate.
Well, thank you, Mr. Gurumurthy, for taking the time out and putting this into context. A large number of people are wondering why this is happening repeatedly, and those visuals, viewers, tell you the entire story. You also saw disturbing visuals of processionists being pelted stones, etc. So, basically, need to organize ourselves. If you don't, you're going to have a few problems. Let's move on, viewers, because there's a very important story, and this concerns India's backyard, so to speak, its sphere of influence. India's immediate neighborhood has just got trickier. Marxist politician Kanniyakumari Dissanayake has won the general elections in Sri Lanka. In the past, Dissanayake has slammed, quote, Indian expansionism, unquote, and called India, quote, the enemy of Sri Lankan interests, unquote. Prime Minister Modi was one of the first leaders to congratulate AKD, as he is known popularly, but New Delhi remains cautious about the incumbent's pro-China tilt. India is now sandwiched between regimes that have little love lost for it. To the west and east are administrations with pronounced Islamist supremacist components in Pakistan and Bangladesh. In fact, just today we've heard that Pakistan has invited Zakir Naik, viewers, Indian fugitive. In the north is Nepal, and New Delhi is proceeding with caution after an unexpected alliance between pro-China Marxist Party, the CPN-UML, and the Nepali Congress there. Myanmar is imploding into anarchy, where Chinese have made inroads and the Americans are trying to manipulate events. Now, viewers, all of this, many people think, poses a channel. Am I therefore right to conclude that these factors make things tricky for India and its sphere of influence, or am I guilty of over-exaggeration? Let's put these questions out to two individuals who know a lot about Sri Lanka at one level, and of course the larger Indosphere, so to speak, at another. Padma Rao, senior journalist who has been covering the elections in Lanka, also joins us, and Professor Brahma Chileni, strategic expert. Now, Padma Rao, how do we see AKD, as he is called popularly? Is he going to sort of be a bit of a problem to deal with where India is concerned, or is he going to be pragmatic and perhaps let his ideological baggage sort of sit aside?
Good evening, Rahul. Thank you for having me. Actually, I think he's already set his ideological baggage aside, and that process began about 9 years ago when he formed a coalition of activists, intellectuals, women's rights activists, etc. So that gave him a kind of cloak of respectability, and it is that coalition that actually won the election, the National People's Power. So he has enough of cushioning to overcome the reputation that his own party, the JVP, which is undoubtedly the largest in that grouping, has. It indeed has, as you described it, a history of riots and violent protests, and thousands of people were killed in the 70s and the 80s. And it also notably protested against the India-Sri Lanka Peace Accord and the 13th Amendment to the Sri Lankan Constitution, which envisages greater autonomy to the north and east for the Tamil population. But I don't see him as an immediate. I think that Sri Lanka is, caught between a rock and a hard place right now, and more so somebody who is come to power with populist promises, because it is in a terrible economic crisis, and that crisis is far from resolved. So whatever may actually be the JVP's philosophy, I think Dissanayake is certainly going to play that down, and he has to tread a very pragmatic tightrope as far as the international community, but also as far as the immediate region, specifically India, is concerned. And one of the things I'd like to say is that he was invited to Delhi in March
February.
this year,
Yeah.
February this year, and he has been, and that immediately gave Sri Lankans a suspicion that this is the yes man that India is looking for. So there's always that, feeling that India has a hand in everybody who comes to power here. That this has been going on for a very long time. Almost every election has sort of the dark, looming shadow of India in the background. But as I said, it's really the international and the regional situation that will make sure that whatever else his philosophy may be, it will be kept in check for now.
Right. Let me bring in Mr. Chileni. How do you see the situation in the subcontinent evolve?
Well, at first, it shows that India is located in a very troubled neighborhood, a combustible neighborhood facing threats or challenges from virtually every direction. India confronts what I have long called the tyranny of geography. And this combustible neighborhood with its spillover effects is a perennial challenge to India's internal and external security. So the vote in Sri Lanka clearly is an anti-establishment vote. That's how AKD has been elected. But the challenge that AKD will face will largely be with the IMF and the international community, not so much with India. India was quite generous in keeping Sri Lankan economy afloat when Sri Lanka had this economic meltdown. India provided something like $4 billion in assistance. Compare that with IMF's $2.9 billion loan to Sri Lanka, just come with stiff conditions. The Indian credit was made available to Sri Lanka with no conditions. So AKD, despite his ideological background, his Marxist-Leninist background, and ideologically he might be pro-China, just the way KP Oli in Nepal, the Marxist-Leninist prime minister, is pro-China. Yet the fact for his government, for AKD's government, would be that Sri Lanka can ill afford to alienate India. The previous governments in Sri Lanka followed this policy of equidistance between India and China, as if Sri Lanka is located equidistance between China and India. India is right next door. And yet, the previous two governments in Sri Lanka pursued this policy of equidistance between China and India, and AKD might follow the same path. It may not be an openly anti-India foreign policy, but certainly not what India expected. If Premadasa had been elected president of Sri Lanka, India could have expected a much friendlier government in Colombo, but India has to deal with whichever government takes office, and in Sri Lanka, AKD will face major internal and external challenges.
And does that also hold true, Mr. Chileni, for Bangladesh? Of course, Pakistan, I don't need to even touch upon, but Bangladesh, Myanmar?
The problem with Bangladesh and Myanmar is the role of external powers. There wasn't any external intervention in Sri Lanka. The government change happened democratically. In Bangladesh, clearly, there were elements, forces that played a role from beyond Bangladesh's borders. And in Myanmar, external forces are fueling the internal war. The US under Biden has been providing quote-unquote non-lethal aid to the rebels in Myanmar. Non-lethal aid, according to Washington's own definition, includes lethal weaponry. For example, the flow of lethal weapons into Manipur, including drones, underscores how the Myanmar situation is impacting India's internal security. And in the case of Bangladesh, Biden is going to meet with Bangladesh's figurehead leader Mohammed Yunus tomorrow.
If he remembers him, that is.
Sorry?
If he remembers, that is.
Yeah, if he remembers that, in fact, if he remembers the appointment and remembers Yunus's name, but the meeting has been scheduled, which is the reason why Yunus has left for New York a day earlier than he was previously scheduled to leave.
Let me bring in Ms. Padma Rao once more. Indian government is wary of Lanka giving safe harbor to Chinese alleged spy ships. Let's just call them that loosely. Will AKD be open to India's concerns? There are also, of course, issues with regards to the Adani investment there and follow through with human rights abuses on the Tamil minorities, etc. How do you see that playing out?
These are three separate issues. One is the Chinese naval incursions, frequent forays into the Indian Ocean. The other is the Tamil question, and the third is the Adani wind power project. I'll start with the last one. The Adani wind power project there's a public interest litigation against it for other reasons. So that is one of the subjects that AKD picked up in his recent election rhetoric and said that he is going to, remove that project because there's an element of corruption in it. So when I followed that up, I followed it up with the same question also to the president, the outgoing, or rather the last president, Ranil Wickremesinghe, on a couple of days before the election. And he also said actually that there is indeed a question mark hanging over that particular project. So we are looking at it and all elements will be considered, but we're not throwing out projects per se because they're Indian projects. So that was Mr. Wickremesinghe. So this Adani project, AKD he just brought it up in his election rhetoric, but there is a public interest litigation. It is in courts, and that is the reason why any party, whoever, if Sajith Premadasa had come to power, he would have said the same thing. The second question on the Tamil question. Now, I've been, speaking to a lot of the Tamils are very miffed with the establishment, all of the singular establishment in Colombo, because they say that none of them, they've been promising for years and years and years that they are going to, they implement the 13th Amendment or implement beyond that, and they're making them all kinds of promises just in exchange of votes and support for their candidatures. So this time there was a split in the Tamil National Alliance, which is practically the only parliamentary representation of the Tamils in Colombo. And the TNA is on the verge of, a major fracture. Part of it supported Mr. Sajith Premadasa, and the others floated their own independent Tamil candidate for the first time in the history of Sri Lanka. There was an independent Tamil candidate who contested the elections and did pretty well, actually, given that, he was the first, this was the first time. So now,
I'm really running out of time, so 30 seconds.
Sorry.
Yes. Yeah.
That faction which supported him says that we are actually we want a what's it called, a referendum in the north and east, right? And what was your third question? The Chinese forays into the Indian Ocean. Now look, any of these gentlemen, there were 38 candidates. No matter who came to power, they would have to play a balancing act between China and India. But what is happening is that there is a larger awareness of the growing presence and of Indo-Pacific alliances. So for the moment now, it seems that things are under control, but everybody in each and every one of them will have to manage it.
Well, the next few days, viewers, will be crucial, of course, as he takes charge, and let's see how that plays out. Thank you very much for joining in, and coming up next is Anand Narasimhan with The Right Stand.
So it was a very important CEO roundtable which Prime Minister chaired. In fact, CEOs from 15 top IT and tech companies of United States participated in the roundtable. Prime Minister's message was, come and invest in India. Be a part of India's growth story. That was Prime Minister's message to all the CEOs. In fact, there were CEOs from the semiconductor companies. Google CEO Sundar Pichai was also there, and the other companies which are doing business in biotechnology, semiconductors, artificial intelligence, etc., etc. So it was a very important CEO roundtable which Prime Minister chaired in New York, and after which in fact held 3 bilateral meetings also. One with the Prime Minister of Palestine, which is very important, Griha.
Yes.
And in fact Prime Minister reiterated India's principal position on Israel-Palestine issue. Prime Minister also met KP Oli, the Prime Minister of Nepal, in New York. Remember, KP Oli has not visited India yet. So with that regard, this visit is also very significant. And Prime Minister also met the Crown Prince of Kuwait, and in fact Prime Minister thanked Crown Prince of Kuwait for taking care of Indian diaspora, because Kuwait has largest Indian diaspora. Back to you.
Absolutely. Also, Siddhant, since you mentioned semiconductor, there has been a very, very crucial deal between India and US that's been inked as far as the semiconductor fabrication plants. This is going to give a lot of impetus, not just to technological development, but also towards national security. Let's first take a look at what the Prime Minister had to say about semiconductors, and then I'll come back to you, Siddhant.
सेमीकंडक्टर में हम $15 बिलियन का एडिशनल इन्वेस्टमेंट करने की दिशा में हम आगे बढ़ रहे हैं। दुनिया भर से भी, जैसा मैंने कहा, इन्वेस्टमेंट आ रहा है और भारत का प्राइवेट सेक्टर भी इन दिनों में काफी इस मात्रा में निवेश कर रहा है। हाल ही हुए हमने एक सेमिकॉन इंडिया समिट की, आप में से कुछ साथी उसमें थे भी। भारत के पास ग्लोबल सेमीकंडक्टर इकोसिस्टम सप्लाई चेन में एक रिलायबल और क्रेडिबल पार्टनर बनने की पूरी क्षमता है। आज हमारा इलेक्ट्रॉनिक सेक्टर $150 बिलियन से ज्यादा का है। हमारा लक्ष्य इसे 2030 में $500 बिलियन तक ले जाने का है, ताकि इस सेक्टर में 6 मिलियन नई जॉब्स की हम आपूर्ति कर सकते हैं।
Received a grand welcome there from the Indian diaspora, where he emphasized that the day is near when Americans will see the Made in India chip. Now, after addressing the Indian diaspora, Prime Minister Modi also held the Tech CEOs Roundtable in New York and discussed India's vast potential and opportunities that the country can offer in these sectors. Remember, he'd also held separate talks with world leaders, including his Nepalese counterpart KP Sharma Oli, also Kuwait Crown Prince and the Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas, reaffirming India's support for Palestinian people. And now he's all set to be addressing the Summit of the Future at the UNGA.
The forum that sets the national agenda is back.
When there are elections in a country and they give you results you don't like, you call them electoral autocracy.
With an unmatched legacy across India's important cities.
There is no such thing as a BJP foreign policy or a Congress foreign policy. There's only India's foreign policy.
Featuring policymakers at the heart of shaping the nation and economy.
It was this government which has amended the minimum alternative tax.
Alongside India's most iconic voices from diverse fields.
सोनू के टीटू की स्वीटी वो फिल्म थी जिसने मुझे घरों तक पहुंचाया.
Bangalore is absolutely the startup capital of the country.
To spark debate and engage in uninhibited conversations.
एकनाथ जी मुख्यमंत्री बनेंगे, ये बात तो मुझे पहले से पता थी.
In the only town hall that matters and about to get bigger, better and more impactful. CNN News 18 Town Hall.
At L'Oréal Group.
AI है जो भारत को ड्राइव कर रही है, और वो कौन सा और है? वो है A for aspirational, I for India. एस्पिरेशनल इंडिया। साथियों, हमने विमेन वेलफेयर के साथ ही विमेन लेड डेवलपमेंट पर फोकस किया है। एक तरफ दुनिया के कई देशों के बीच संघर्ष है, तनाव है, तो दूसरी तरफ कई देशों में डेमोक्रेसी का जश्न चल रहा है। आज जब भारत ग्लोबल प्लेटफॉर्म पर कुछ कहता है तो दुनिया सुनती है। इनिशिएटिव ऑन क्रिटिकल एंड इमर्जिंग टेक्नोलॉजी, आईसेट इंक्लूसिव इनोवेशन के लिए हमारे साझा कमिटमेंट का प्रतीक है। आप में से कई साथियों से मैं पहले भी मिला हूं। भारत आपकी ग्रोथ स्टोरी से फैमिलियर है और हम उस पर ट्रस्ट भी करते हैं। आज का भारत एम्बिशियस सपने देखता है और उन्हें पूरा करने का भरसक प्रयास भी करता है। आज भारत विश्व की 5वीं सबसे बड़ी इकोनॉमी है, विश्व की सबसे तेजी से ग्रो करने वाली इकोनॉमी है और मैं पक्का मानता हूं कि मेरा ये जो तीसरा कार्यकाल है उसमें हम 3rd लार्जेस्ट इकोनॉमी का हमारा जो गोल है उसको हम अचीव कर लेंगे।
My colleague Siddhant is with us on the broadcast. Siddhant, this is day 2 of Prime Minister Narendra Modi's visit. We are, of course, waiting for him to address the UNGA, which is called the Summit of the Future. First of all, what can be expected? Will be his line there as far as the Prime Minister is concerned? Is it going to be taking a cue from what was discussed at the Quad Summit of all the 4 world leaders?
Well, Greha, as far as Summit of the Future address of Prime Minister Modi is concerned, it's going to be very, very significant. In fact, we could see Prime Minister touching upon his visits to Russia and Ukraine. We could also expect Prime Minister Modi to give message of peace from that dais. And in fact, the sources have also confirmed to me that there is going to be something big on Russia-Ukraine conflict. Prime Minister would not only touch upon the conflict, but he could
Namaste, Jai Hind and welcome to this edition of The Right Stand. I am Anand Narsimhan. An initiation ceremony or the Janeyu Sanskar, considered the most sacred, has been desecrated in Tamil Nadu's Tirunelveli. The Yajñopavita, as it is called, Poonal in Tamil or Janeyu in Hindi. The ceremony marks the initiation of young boys, in some cases girls. It gives children responsibility to live by virtues, discipline and knowledge. It signifies commitment to discipline and learning among the adolescents. Wearing the sacred thread empowers the child, and the child is empowered to pursue knowledge and uphold moral values as he or she make a transition from childhood to adolescence.